The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's roundtable presentation, Building a Zero Trust Framework with Azure AD and Saviant. My name is Steve Brugger, President of Oxford Computer Group and the moderator for today's panel. As you're probably all aware, Zero Trust isn't a new concept. It's been out there for almost 10 years. What is new is we now have to integrate an exploding number of remote workers, contractors, partners, and customers who access resources across multiple cloud services. And we're all painfully aware that the bad guys understand that the exploding numbers of identities associated with all these roles are an ideal attack vector for them, especially in companies that aren't diligent in protecting their identities. Zero Trust isn't a solution, it's a program to be continually implemented and evaluated in your IT infrastructure. In today's presentation, our panelists will touch on a few of the key challenges around Zero Trust that we're faced with today, and talk about how Saviynt and Microsoft together address these challenges. Our panelists in today's roundtable have years of experience in front of scores of clients across many verticals and across many regulatory frameworks that inform their thoughts about what is needed to properly manage identities in a zero trust environment. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for our roundtable today. And let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Chris Gregory. Chris is a VP Channel Development and VP of Channel Development and Operations for Saviant. Chris joined Saviant after an extensive career with Microsoft, working with Fortune 500 companies on collaboration, identity, and security initiatives. With his extensive knowledge of directory services, Azure, security, governance, and compliance, Chris supports Saviant's channel partners and technical alliances with a focus on Microsoft. Next up, we have Rick Cajudo. Rick works as a principal program manager in the Azure Active Directory engineering team at Microsoft. He spent the last 6 years at Microsoft focused on customer education and adoption of Microsoft's identity and security solutions. And prior to Microsoft, Rick brings 20 years of experience in endpoint computing and security solutions as a system engineer and architect. Andy Shell is also on our roundtable. He is the Vice President in the West region for Oxford Computer Group. He's responsible for client relationships in the western half of the US and leads OCG's identity governance practice. He has over 20 years of consulting experience with large enterprise clients. We'll kick off the panel today with brief remarks from each of the panelists and then open the floor to an extended Q&A session. So let's go ahead and get started with Chris Gregory. And Chris, don't forget to tell me to advance your slides.
Thank you, Steve. I'll be sure and do that. If you don't know who Saviant is, Saviant took the market by storm 10 years ago when we introduced identity analytics and delivering with AI and machine learning and delivering from the cloud at its precipice. Let the slide build, please, Steve. We ensure identity is the new perimeter and make identity work for you. And this enables your zero trust, least privilege access, and just-in-time initiatives. We do this by providing visibility, broad and deep, across all types of identities. Identities can come in the forms of human, silicon, business, consumer, partner. We also like to govern uniformly at scale across all types of the critical assets, whether they be data elements, they be infrastructure elements. They can also be EMR, line of business applications, or bring your own custom apps. And we do this in a secure, balanced, and risk-time approach. And we're proud to say we deliver compliance as a service, and that is our Identity 3.0 offering delivered. Next slide, please. When we talk about Microsoft and how we help Microsoft, let the slide build, please, Steve. We govern the hybrid Microsoft enterprise, whether it is the critical infrastructure assets or the critical business platforms, the Epics, the Infors, the JD Edwards. We provide a 360-degree view of the identity and security from that single pane of glass, looking at the access that's involved, the fine-grained entitlements, the audit trails, the usage logs, and surfacing the real-time events in our dashboard. Build, please. We then were able to provide the critical answers to the questions. Whoa, a little too far. of who has access to what is the access secure, and is it being used appropriately in a compliant, trusted, predictive, and enabling platform, again, for human and silicon identities across the consumer, employee, partner, privileged, IoT, and silicon workloads. Next slide, please. My last slide, what we talk about is the better governance for the modern workspace. Here, we're partnering with Microsoft and driving security solutions across zero trust, dynamic risk governance, and uniform security and compliance, leveraging Microsoft's identity protection, identity governance, and conditional access. We couple this up with workloads, infrastructure apps, SaaS identity, privileged identities, and guests. And we focus in with privileged access management. We can secure any app, any server, with session recording, with just-in-time and zero-standing privilege. We couple that with our deep identity governance, which is intelligent and frictionless with segregation of duties. And we also handle the guest access, providing that visibility and ability to assess risk and delegate administration. And as all compliance controls that service and alert, we have the ability to provide real-time remediation. I'm pleased to go ahead and hand off to a good friend of mine, Mr. Rick Cajudo from Microsoft.
Thank you, Chris. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Rick Cajudo, and I'm a principal program manager in Azure AD Engineering. Next slide, please. Just quickly want to talk, we've heard zero trust a couple times. Steve and Chris has brought it up, and I just wanted to take a step back just a little bit just to talk about Microsoft's modern approach to zero trust. Yes, Steve mentioned zero trust has been around for years, but it's typically designed around the network perimeter. Anything outside the network perimeter is untrusted. Anything inside the perimeter is trusted, right? So with this new modern approach in the days we live in now, we have to think about this differently, right? So we want to just talk to really quickly the three new core principles when we think about our zero trust approach. All right, we want to verify explicitly, right? Always authenticate and authorize based on all available data points, right? Including user's identity, location, device health, service or workload or data or network, right? All those elements need to be verified, and then we can use that least privilege access that Chris talked a little bit about. I mean, that's fundamentally around just in time and just enough access. And we build risk-based adaptive policies for that. Then the last core principle is we assume breach, right? I'm not perfect, the technologies are not perfect, people applying these policies to your organization are not perfect, and attackers are getting more and more sophisticated, right? We want to give you the tools, visibility, the analytics, and set some automation where applicable to minimize that blast radius. Next slide, please. So a critical step towards starting that zero trust journey is consolidating secure access to all application, whether they are on-prem or in the cloud. Now, the ones that are in the cloud, obviously Microsoft we can leverage Microsoft Azure and Microsoft Office, but we also can support all third-party applications as well. If they support open protocols, open standards, we can support that. The more challenging one that we see is the legacy application. The applications that are typically running your business that have been around for a long time. We do have capabilities native to Azure AD and then partnerships called as part of our secure hybrid access. And so leverage all of those capabilities, provide that secure single sign-on, and then you can put conditional access or your access controls in front of that. Next slides, please. And lastly, I'll just kind of leave with this, is that Azure AD was built upon open standards, right? Again, I talked about single sign-on and the open standards. It's OAuth 2, SAML, OpenID. There's kind of table stakes for our single sign-on. But we'll do also support like provisioning, provisioning with your HR system or the third-party services as well. Having that provisioning place, we based off of that on the SCIM protocol. Microsoft has been leading as a key contributor in identity standards for over 20 years. We're part of the FIDO Alliance and building passwordless technologies into our solution. And then we're also part of the decentralized identities for that. So this, because of this open standards and interoperable ecosystem, that we can have a great, we can open ourselves up to having great partnerships like Saviynt. So with that being said, I want to hand that over to Andy.
Thanks, Rick. My name's Andy Shell. I'm a vice president with Oxford Computer Group. And for those not familiar with Oxford, right, we are an identity and security consultancy very focused on the Microsoft stack. It has been that way for almost 20 years now. We are a managed partner in multiple areas within the Microsoft ecosystem, including the product group that Rick is a member of, as well as the security solutions area. And we have a regular cadence with Microsoft to help us, resolve customer blockers. We are also a Saviant partner and have been for many years. About 4 years ago, we recognized, I guess, the potential for a Microsoft and Saviant partnership and introduced Saviant to the Microsoft product group. And that has resulted in, a very successful, at this point, long-running partnership. So now I'll turn it over to my good friend and boss, Steve.
Thanks for the quick intros, everyone, and the informative slides. The primary focus of this presentation today is our roundtable discussion. And we've set up the Q&A a little bit differently than we have in the past. First off, we asked attendees to submit questions in advance, and they did that. We got some great questions, which I've got a group of here, and I'll kick it off with some of those. Our panelists also talked to scores of clients and submitted questions that they hear on a pretty regular basis. And I'm going to start this with my favorite one. You'll hear that in a minute. You can still submit your questions to the panelists real time. Use the question tab in the GoToWebinar interface to do that. And we've got people monitoring the questions that are inbound. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So I'll put this back up so we can be reminded who you're talking to. And I'm going to start out with my favorite question because I hear this on a regular basis as well. So, quote, "We rolled out Teams in a hurry." I've heard that a few times. "At the start of the pandemic without a lot of consideration for the governance aspects. How does Saviynt for Teams governance help us implement the proper controls after the fact?" Chris, I'm going to throw that one at you.
Awesome, Steve, and that is a great question, and I've heard that a lot too, and I think everyone can appreciate the fact of what we've just come through and what we've experienced. It was probably the most accelerated adoption of the best collaboration platform out there. And one of the things that Saviynt has the ability to do is access your team's environment, ensure that Teams channels and there has owners, and that when owners leave, there's succession. Another key component is looking and validating the security of your teams in our 360-degree view dashboard and surfacing areas where you have orphan teams, where your members have left and external users are there, and even take it a step further and look within the Teams channels and see where you have external parties present, where you have sensitive data or data you may have classified as internal only accidentally, because we all know how the file system behind Teams can get a little bit long in the tooth and get very filled with good data, and understanding where that data is and having visibility into it and ensuring that the right data policies are being adhered to is something Saviynt helps customers with currently.
Great. Rick or Andy, anything to add to that response?
No, I just say that it's a very common occurrence, right, these days, that people just threw Teams out there because they had to. And now they got to go back and, do the work to get it under the proper controls and, clean it up and make sure that, they're appropriately approved, certified, and, like Chris said, they have an owner, right, that's actually still with the company.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, and I would also like to add, as I work with the customers, with the quickly adopting Teams, one of the things that we always recommend is at the very minimum, they would turn on MFA for all of those users, right? And in addition, What they could also do is just the compensating controls for like, as part of Azure AD conditional access, there is a terms of use policy that can be applied, right? So the organization can craft like a terms of use and they have to accept, and you can track those acceptances. So those are two ones that were commonly used.
Excellent. This next question is pretty related to it because a lot of our clients are dealing with external users quite a bit. This particular question is from Martin, who's in the healthcare vertical. I'm curious about the external users. Specifically, what is the best way to create an identity for the external users? Would they be created in Azure AD, or would Saviant be the identity store for the external users? I'm going to pitch that one to Rick first, and then let Chris chime in.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately going to determine whether or not, I think in the past, it's typically anytime you're dealing with partners, a lot of organizations wanted to control the life cycle of that identity, right? So they would create a separate directory or create the account within their own personal directory and control that entire life cycle of the identity. What we've done to modernize some of this approach is we have a capability or solutions, I should say, called external identities. And it's really kind of broken up to two parts of it. First is it's a kind of a B2C scenario where you can bring your, depending on the app and the scenario, they could leverage any social media accounts to have access to the apps that they're going to be using. The other one is more traditional of what we call as a B2B, business to business collaboration, where it's more of an invitational model, right? So that they're actually not, we're not creating an account, but we are allowing them to bring their own identities, and then you can provide authorization to a resource. So similarly to how you share a file on OneDrive or SharePoint, right? You would invite them to have access to OneDrive, and then they would accept or click on the link. Behind the scenes, that's you leveraging that business to business model, right? Let them bring their own identities. Their organization will handle the the authentication, and the source company will handle the authorization.
Yeah, and I think, Rick, those are solid foundations. And I think the one thing to take even a step further, where Saviant has helped a few customers, is through having the compliance attached to that, the ability to delegate a responsible party and have that party be a representative to register other identities which may come in. Certifying, again, the key principles of governance is assuring, just like Teams channels have owners, every external identity coming in should have a sponsor and owner. And we should be able to surface that in a dashboard and provide those controls so we can have a tight understanding of who's coming into the network as a guest and that they're performing the right functions. And Saviynt can take that to the federated and the non-federated apps. And we've seen that with a lot of our oil and gas industry specific customers who have systems that are not integrated with the core authentication authorization platform.
Yeah, but I think the core principle here is that really is Azure AD is, ideally the single identity repository for all those identities, right? And then, partner solutions such like Saviynt are adding capabilities into that.
That's correct. Yep.
All right. Any other comments around that particular question about your external users?
No, I just think it's a good question because there's a lot of solutions out there, partner solutions, whether they're Microsoft partners or not, right? That they all want to be the kind of like the identity repository. But ultimately, if you're an M365 customer, Azure AD is your identity repository.
And that's actually a great segue into the next question that was submitted by one of our attendees. This is from Robert, who's in pharma. What are the recommended division of capabilities between Azure AD and Saviant? And we get this one all the time. Andy, you want to kick that one off?
So the core functionality, right, around identity is embedded within Azure AD, right, for the vast majority of our customers, right? And then what we're looking at Saviant is extending those capabilities around complex governance situations, or into, non-Microsoft stack, let's say applications, capabilities that exist within the enterprise. Pretty much 100% of our customers are hybrid enterprise. They have Microsoft and they have a bunch of other things, especially in healthcare, with Epic or Cerner or such. And so Saviynt is extending those governance capabilities, right, to that other applications. It's also extending the capabilities themselves, right, to those applications.
Anything to add, Rick or Chris?
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's what we're there for. We fully complement the M365 Azure Active Directory value. And, as Andy mentioned, Epic and Cerner, very critical EMR systems that they themselves warrant segregation of duties and fine-grained entitlements beyond your basic user in a group. Group has access to an app. It's now the function that can be performed within that specific application, and making sure that the boundaries are appropriately respected. And if they have to be crossed, there is a way to document a variance and have that for audit and historical purposes.
Yeah, and we're actually in the midst of one of those Epic integrations with Saviynt ourselves, and that is one of the key benefits of the Saviynt platform, is that fine-grained off within those EMR systems. All right.
I think the segregation of duties pieces between those various applications is also critical.
Absolutely.
Right. So that ability to, application one and application two to, prevent SOD provisioning is like a core functional requirement that Saviynt fulfills. Chris, I don't know if you want to kind of add in, right? Because I do think that is where Saviynt does shine, is when you get into that SOD piece.
Yeah, and I think, again, having, whether it's not just bound to a specific application, but what's unique about Saviynt segregation of duty is it can span applications, span roles, be applied to roles, and have the ability to keep the swim lanes really defined for who is doing what inside the enterprise. If you remember from my intro slides, it's all about who has what access, do they need that access, isn't it being used appropriately? And segregation of duty, where you have definitely classic, what we'll call toxic combinations of accounts payable, accounts receivable, medical prescriber versus medical billing, being able to keep that segregation of duty and ensure the integrity of the data to adhere to compliance needs is definitely something Saviynt shines at.
Yeah, and also preventative as well as detective. So, you can go through this as this, like Chris said, this is toxic. We're not going to allow that to happen. Or it may be a situation where it could happen if it got some level of approval, and we're willing to authorize it for a certain amount of time, right? You can manage that through Saviynt.
Yeah, I particularly like the layer of risk analysis that is presented by the Saviynt platform as well, and actually components of the Microsoft portion of it too. So layering in the extent of the risk associated with those SOD issues is really quite important. Anything else to add before we go to the next question? All right, so I'll have fun with this one. This is another question. We're using E5 security capabilities. What additional capabilities does the Saviynt Cloud PAM provide to enhance Microsoft's E5 security capabilities? So I'm gonna give Rick a hard time and preface this by saying, who the heck can keep up with all of the changes and additions to those security capabilities? You guys are running them out the door so quickly, I can't keep up myself.
Yes, we definitely, yeah, and especially when you say E5, and I thought for sure you were going to give us a hard time about all the E3, E5, P1, P2. I thought that's where this question was going.
Well, no, I bit my tongue on that one.
Yeah, no, it's probably a good question there for Chris. But yes, we do have a lot of security capabilities across our M365, E5. Obviously, my focus area is really on the identity portion of the security workloads. But we do have privileged access management and privileged identity management capabilities. But we're really leveraging that partnership with Saviant to bring out a real great, unique capability that goes above and beyond kind of what we've done. So I don't know, Chris, you want to talk to that a little bit? I think you brought it a little bit in your introduction slides, but feel free to talk to it.
Absolutely, and thanks, Rick. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with all the changes you guys have coming down the pike, but one of the things we did at Saviant with our partnership with Identity Engineering is really look to complement the privileged identity management feature inside of Azure Active Directory P2. And by doing this, we have gone ahead and enabled the requests to come from PIM and be pushed out to a listener to Saviynt, where the actual entitlement is built inside the user's MyApps portal for, again, that base user permission, which may always be there. Now, the elevated permission, once approved, we build that access into the MyApps portal. When the user clicks on that, they have full session recording and over-the-shoulder monitoring. But there's more to it when we take it at a context from Zero Trust. The ability to have your privileged accounts in that nature have zero standing privilege, zero standing access, meaning that it is just in time provisioned. The user never has the credentials. This eliminates things that are, the bane of security teams' existence, such as credential sharing, having servers that can do replays, leaving accounts open to pass the hash or honey token type attacks. So we eliminate all that with just-in-time access for RDP, SSH, and database access. And Saviant's newest announcements, we've announced the ability to provide PAM services across Azure, all clouds included, and on-premise. So we have the ability to be a holistic PAM solution and have those requests integrate with Azure AD Privileged Identity Manager. So you get all of the goodness of having your workload in Azure AD PIM, and you leverage everything that Microsoft provides from a conditional access point of view with the MFA prompts and the ability to mitigate risk and to identify risky performers and identify bad actors. Now, Saviant's process in that we too can assess risk and we can elevate risk. When a user has his access approved, we know what that access is. And let's say that someone has a request approved, but they go in and they perform something that a bad actor would, and they open up the Windows firewall and they start to change port configurations to create a backdoor, or they go into Salesforce and they make a broad sweeping change. That's a high risk. We have the ability with Saviant to not only view that session post, but also get the alert real time that there's a variance, a high alert risk image inside of a PAM session, join that session and terminate it immediately, as well as replay. And the beauty of the Saviant PAM offering and through our partnership with Microsoft, we're able to take all of the PAM approval logs, the sessions, and push those off to an Azure Sentinel, where a SOC team member can constantly be alerted, be able to mitigate those alerts and view sessions and keep them for a historical purpose to ensure that change control variances were not gone outside, and that bad actors and people who may be leaving the organization have not left any type of backdoors or ways into the network. Again, it's done with zero standing privilege, no account. So it's very different from your legacy PAM solutions. Zero standing privilege, assume that you have nothing and you'll have nothing coming or going, but you can have all you need to execute the session efficiently.
Yeah, the integration with Sentinel is pretty cool. It gives you that single pane of glass and keeps that single pane of glass so that, your people in the SOC don't have to go to multiple different tools to kind of see what's going on, right? And they can just stay with Sentinel.
Now, just like to add, I was thinking as Chris was talking that we years ago, we had a customer, I think it was one with Oxford, but we had a customer that we did an analysis of one of their tenants and found out that they had about 300 global administrators, and the only users in that tenant were like 3,000, right? So 300 global administrators. And so one, obviously we wanted to reduce that. Again, no standing privileges, right? So remove that based on general RBAC, and then also put PIM in place, and then we only had like 2 or 3 users that actually were going to be full administrators, right? So yeah, highly recommend, like, securing those privileged accesses.
So you guys are actually addressing that whole issue of the interface between the Saviant capabilities and the core Azure AD identity functionality. There was an extensive post by Sue Bone, who runs the engineering team for the identity group at Microsoft after Ignite. Chris, can you touch on some of the points that she made? I think you're fairly familiar with that blog that she put up there.
Certainly. Well, we were called out at post-Ignite by Identity Engineering and Sue Bone for being one of Microsoft's strategic partners. And that's always an honor, and it shows a proof point for our Microsoft partnership. But Sue herself does a lot of fireside chats and blogs, and she did a fireside chat where she was talking about zero trust, and she stresses the need for governance and zero trust to be a joint hand-in-hand effort. And I think that's really important to call out. It's great to have the zero trust, least privilege model and control multi-factor authentication when you get right up to the point of authenticating, but let's look and see that someone had to have their access approved to that application, and ensuring you have the right governance and controls. And you can, in fact, go back and certify those results and validate, yes, that person should have had that access at the time that they authenticated. That is how governance and zero trust from an identity perspective can come together.
Yeah, I think Sue's announcement was also the capabilities around B2C, right? Governance over those external identities as well as internal identities.
Yeah, so Andy, our B2C offering, and this is a zero trust talk, so I wasn't going to bring this up, but thanks for giving me the window too. Our B2C offering is about securing the identity repository itself. B2C is an awesome consumer application enabling directory service platform. That's different than your business Azure Active Directory, but it is an Azure Active Directory instance, all the none. And what we're able to provide is that security blanket and that sense of knowing that the right administrators have the right access to the most crown jewel of your customer data, and the ability to enable them to update very limited features and limit the scope through delegated administration within that B2C identity repository, ultimately is going to give people a little bit of a security blanket. And you can't put a price on peace of mind, wondering if, hey, if my consumer data, which is what all the attackers are after, it's the PII, if my own administrators can't see it and change it, well, then we know that it's not going to be, we get a little bit of sense of security around that.
Yeah, in some cases, it's a requirement now. You look at GDPR or the new California privacy regulations, right? The ability to limit access to that data based on some geography for those administrators is no longer optional, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
By law.
So one of the other questions, this segues nicely into one of the other questions that came in. What role does compliance play within a zero trust deployment?
Well, I think it's important to say that, compliance is all about assuring that the right people have access to the right things and you can certify it to meet a compliance mandate. So let's take a SOX application suite, for example, and we want to certify that the right group has the right group members that can access the right application with the right fine-grained controls with the right segregation of duty controls between financials and actuals, etc., within modules, that is where compliance can really couple with zero trust.
Any other comments?
No,
Andy?
I was going to say, I think there's, they are different, but I think a lot of cases, the actions to do both are the same, right? The actions that get you compliant, as long as you're not treating it as, I just need to pass a compliance audit, and you're actually taking it to heart, right? That this compliance will make you a better organization. Then I think a lot of the same activities apply to both, and you need to kind of view your overall program from a compliance and zero trust perspective as an integrated effort, right? And not separate efforts.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. So another attendee question, and we're shifting gears here a little bit. We've been talking somewhat technically for the last few minutes, but this is a great question. You've got to sell this. Selling the need to view IAM as an ongoing initiative and not a one and done project. What are some of the arrows you can help these guys put in their quiver to sell this to senior management? I know we've been doing this from a technical perspective, but if we take it up a level to the business side of things, what can we say to help these guys sell it to senior management?
I think it's going to depend on the industry, right? There's some industries that fully recognize, that it's ongoing program and it needs to be done right. You take financial services, you take healthcare, right? The whole security mindset, should be ingrained, into those. And, if not, they've already been burnt by a breach. Some other entities, there's companies out there that run junkyards, right? That are not small companies and they're publicly traded, right? And so their only perspective is SOX, right? But somehow you have to tie your identity program, right? Not only from a security perspective, but a user experience perspective to the needs of those business units, right? Where those users are, right? So if you have a business unit, right? And so talking to a trucking company this morning, right? So they have a bunch of drivers out there, right? How quickly can they get access, right? So that they can pick up loads that are revenue generating, and tie it around that very specifically. I got a friend of mine who told me, right, and you might figure out the company on this, right? He told me, Andy, you need to talk to this and how you can help me sell jeans, right? Because that's what they do. They sell jeans, right? And so you have to talk in the context of, what is your business and how are you going to enable that business?
Yeah, and Andy, I agree with that 100%, but I also think it's which level in the business you're talking to. I think the CIO level resource certainly gets a lot of input on the top 10 initiatives and objectives. The chief compliance individual, whoever is delegated responsible for compliance, is certainly going to have an interest in what regulatory compliance can hit them. And even, as to Andy's point, even if they don't have SOX and they don't have HIPAA and they don't have the need for segregation of duty, a compliance mandate can come from your own CISO, right? So giving people the concept that they can always identify who has access to what and automate that compliance as a service process and be ahead of the curve and surfacing events in real time and allowing for mitigation. This is about putting the right controls in the right people's hands to discover things quicker, respond quicker. And I think, as Rick had said, is really limit the blast radius. If you see something that is out of variance or something that's in a non-compliant state, a Teams channel where an external user is there and your internal members have left the channel and there's sensitive data, you have the ability to take corrective action immediately because it's going to be surfaced in a very rapid session through compliance as a service and always on process, which is very much rationalized from your traditional point in time query and just, running a report every now and then to assess the environment. Now we're actually lighting up a full dashboard, which is going to bring the real-time risk and the real events to the top and then sort them by the highest risk and allow you to mitigate.
Yeah, I think my point was really just you got to take a look at it from the perspective of somebody who owns a profit and loss, right? Somebody within that organization that owns a P&L and figure out how do I help them, right, improve their business, whether I do it from a cost reduction standpoint, I do it from hey, the user experience for their customers is better, the user experience for their first line workers is better, right? Or a risk reduction perspective, right? I'm, reducing the risk that, some critical data may get out. Just as much as you have to look at it from the perspective of the chief compliance officer or the CISO, right? Because those people look at things differently. Right, and understanding that viewpoint and positioning that viewpoint, I think, will help you sell it within the organization.
I think another thing to add too is again, thinking about the audience. In some cases, you get to a point where I have customers who are created their own IDP, but eventually you have business decision makers that say, I need to get out of the identity business. Let's rely on partnerships and strategic partnerships like Microsoft and leverage Azure Active Directory and get out of the identity business so I can deal with my own business, right? Why do I have a full team of 300 or whatever it is to build our own identity system and control that? Let's leverage the experts. And it's a cloud service. We constantly make changes and we're constantly finding ways to make things easier for our customers. Again, visibility and analytics and automation behind all that, right? So,
all right. So I've got another question. This one is from Eddie, who's in the finance vertical. What's a realistic time frame to project to achieve zero trust? I kind of save this towards the end because it's a great question.
It's also, I think, a very difficult question without some context about the organization, right? Because, not only the size and complexity of the organization, but, where do they stand already, right? So if you're starting from scratch, and you're a Fortune 1000 company, you're on a multi-year path, right? But if you're smaller, right, and you're a very Microsoft-centric shop, it could be a fairly, quick path to it, right? So I think it's, that level of complexity and the size of the organization, I'm familiar with that company, right? So, and it's a complex organization, and it's financial services as well. So the security requirements and security expectations are really high, and CISOs in that position have a very, very difficult job. But I do think that you should view it as a kind of a rolling path. Technologies are going to change. So even if you kind of quote completed your zero trust journey, it's going to start again tomorrow, right? So I think you're going to have to continue, just view it as a program and not something that is going to start and end.
Well, and Rick alluded to another component of this. Your zero trust program sits on top of an evolving IT infrastructure, and that infrastructure itself is evolving very quickly over those longer periods of time. So back to the point that Rick made, do you want to be in the identity business when companies like Microsoft are rapidly evolving the capabilities of their systems?
Well, and there's no way that any company is going to be able to secure their infrastructure better than Microsoft is securing theirs, right? It's not their job, it's not their focus, and they don't have the dollars that Microsoft is investing, right? I mean, you got people hundreds of people like Rick that are solely focused on making that an identity, a better identity project.
Yeah, I'd like to add that there are a couple of things that we've done in the past. Like Microsoft has always had this evolving white paper that's gives just the high level, some foundational stuff for securing privileged access, and it does have a high level things that we could provide of the things you can do in 30 days, 90 days, and then ongoing. yes, that's only part of that zero trust story, but it's things that we've all been talking about on this call, right? Just in time, just enough access, all those kinds of capabilities and things that the organizations should be doing. And then we also have like guidance for like the, zero trust deployment specifically for our Azure AD. We have those guides, but to be able to give you like, this is how long it's going to take, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to have to do that depending on the scope of the customer. But it kind of gives you an idea of like some quick, easy wins that you can do first 30 days, 90 days, and then ongoing. So definitely, encourage people to, reach out to Oxford and trusted partners like that to help develop a plan for your organization.
Great.
Maybe a little disappointing for Eddie, but we don't have a concrete answer for him, right? So.
Hey, we're coming up on our time. I do want to point out one of the themes of this conversation that I've heard, and that's that interface between what does Saviant do and what does the Microsoft Azure AD platform do, and all of the component pieces that go into answering that. Andy's actually put together a pretty good slide that attempts to answer that question. And it's also a moving target, right? All of the contributors here are constantly improving their products. If you're interested in seeing Andy's snapshot of that, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Andy. Andy.Shell at oxfordcomputergroup.com. He does an inventory of all of the identity workloads and shows you where Microsoft's contributing, where Saviant's contributing, and there are a couple of other players in there as well. But defining what that interface looks like is an important part of coming up with a solution. All right, I'd like to.
The important thing with that is that it evolves daily, right? Both Microsoft and Saviant are continually innovating, right? In providing those services. So that slide is constantly changing. So it'll be out of date when I give it to you, but so.
Well, and that's just the nature of the beast, right? It's all evolving so quickly. So we at Oxford are constantly staying on top of this and spend a lot of time with the engineering teams, not only at Microsoft and Saviant, but the other partners that we work with.
Yeah, there's a question that's right up Chris's alley in the chat window too.
Oh, I just saw that pop up. Chris, I don't know if you see it. I'll read it off for you.
Yeah, if you would, please.
Yep. How will Saviant add further value to Azure AD PIM going forward?
Well, I think the number one thing that we do with Saviant's value to Azure AD PIM is the ability to reach the workloads in a credentialless way, whether it be RDP or SSH or connected databases, Azure infrastructure, on-prem resources. It's going to be the ultimate extension and complementary feature to PIM, which having a privileged identity and identifying that privileged identity and having a role, what Saviant is providing is the privileged access management with the session recording and all of the SOD workflows. It's true complementary offering between the two products, and we've worked with identity engineering to make it just that.
And I think it's important to note, right, that it's not just two products, that kind of do complementary things. This is a deep level of effort between two engineering organizations to build complementary capabilities to bring to market. So it's not, it's not kind of done after the fact by marketing. It's planned in advance by engineering as far as being a full suite solution.
All right. We are coming up on our time. I'm not seeing any new questions appear in the window here. So I'd like to thank our panelists and our audience for the time they've spent with us today. And there's the contact info for Oxford Computer Group. And I'll remind you again of Andy's attempt to help define these interfaces for all of us. andy.shell@oxfordcomputergroup.com. So thank you one more time, both to the panelists and to our attendees, and we hope to see you on our next webinar, which is coming up, next week? We'll have a couple of them. You've probably already got the invites. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, great evening.